I just want to welcome everyone to this presentation, Backyard Medicine. We booked this a long time ago. I think there might have still been snow. I'm not sure. Maria is really busy, and we had to wait for a while to get her in, and I'm really looking forward to it. In the meantime, we've ordered her books. I'm not sure whether both of them are available in the physical format, but they are available through New Hampshire Overdrive or New Hampshire Downloadable, so you can get them that way. And then I also, just one last thing before we get going, the library summer reading program is going to start next week. And we also have programs for adults connected with the summer reading program. And one of the programs and activities that we're doing is Spice Club. And so we'll be having some cooking programs. There's one on July 7th. And it uses, the cookbook that we will be looking at is called Spice Flavors of the Eastern Mediterranean. So in that program, what you'll do is you can pick up spices, you can make some things. We can connect with the author of that cookbook, we can connect with not the author of that cookbook, but the author of other cookbooks who will be talking about that cookbook. And if you still want to do some gardening, it's not too late to do some gardening, especially because you could plant some things in the mid-season. And don't forget, if you need seeds or tools, you can come to the library. We have a seed library and we have a tool library that can help you in your garden. So I'm going to let Maria talk about backyard medicine, and I think she'll talk a little bit about growing some of that backyard medicine. And I look forward to that. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I'm going to just copy and paste one more time for folks who are just coming in that there are notes and slides available to download off my website let me just change that so it's going to everybody. Where's that? My cursor is being a little finicky here. There we go. All right. So you can go to the class notes page of my website under Learn More, and you can get the slides and a grow chart and all sorts of other cool stuff to go along with this class as little bonus materials. And so I'm going to jump in. So we're going to be talking about backyard medicine. And, this is one of my favorite classes to teach, especially for general audiences, because we're going to dive primarily into my favorite plants to grow, most of which are really delicious herbs that I use often in my kitchen, but then I also use all of them for medicine, and some more so than others. So we're going to talk about specific ones and then kind of go from there. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I have a lot more slides than we're going to actually cover. So you'll see that I've got this little star here that is, indicating that something is a bonus slide. So those slides are slides that I'm either going to not cover at all, or I might just mention super briefly, but I thought I'd include them in there so that if you want to download the slides, you can go back and get extra information. And the notes are also pretty well detailed. There are also a handful of places where I've underlined things on the slides. So if you have the PDF of the slides open, we won't be able to do it now because we're in like a video Zoom, but if you have the slides open on your computer, you can click on that and that will bring you to different web pages, and particularly different web pages on my blog that have extra information or free videos or little odds and ends like that. So we're going to go on, and I'm also planning on checking the chat box periodically, but mostly I'm going to check it at the end, and we'll take questions towards the end, which will be closer to 8 o'clock. So if there is something, and Gail, feel free to stop me if something comes up in the chat box that I don't see that is more immediate. Like sometimes I have verbal typos or something might just not make sense, then certainly feel free to interrupt me sooner and we can save other questions for the end. But Just a little bit about me. I've been working with herbs, I says 20 plus years. I think we're at 25 years now working with herbal medicine. And I have a clinical practice and teaching area here based out of my home in Allenstown, New Hampshire, called Wintergreen Botanicals. My business is threefold. So it's seeing clients, teaching classes, and then doing a lot of writing. I actually have a degree in journalism, and all my writing has been about herbs. So I write for a lot of different publications in addition to writing my own books. And I teach throughout my own school here, online, live stream, and also when the times allow it, which we're getting back to that now, in person. And then I also guest teach for a lot of other places all across the country and sometimes the world. So those are my two books. Body into Balance is a more in-depth study of herbal medicine as well as the human body. Very easy to read, very beautifully laid out, and very well organized. I might, if I do say so myself, I'm a little bit OCD, but it's organized by body system. And it really kind of gets into the who, what, why, where, how of how the body, gets out of balance, and then how to bring it back into balance with herbs. So it's a great introduction to herbal medicine, as well as just supporting your body holistically at home. And then there's Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, which is a little bit more geared to what we're talking about today, where it's more plant forward and also organized by, health concern or health goal or body system. But certain plants that you might grow, if you wanted to say, have some brain boosting herbs or some sleep support herbs or digestion support herbs. So it'll feature a handful of herbs that fit that, and then some different remedies that you can make. And then in the back, there are more detailed profiles on each herb and other odds and ends. So both really nice complements to each other, just depends on what you're looking for. And it's awesome that the library has access to those for you. You can also buy them pretty much anywhere books are sold, including through me. And on that note, I do have a deal for you. So if you want to buy books through my website, if you get Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies through me, you'll get extra bonus items like some videos and extra ebooks. And then if you get two books, either two of the same book, if you're going to share it, or one of each book, then you use the code BOOKDEAL, all one word, you'll get $5 off your order. And if you are local to me in Allenstown, New Hampshire, you can get a free pickup option, but they won't let you put both things in. So just put it in your notes, and then I'll refund you the shipping price. My online shopping place won't let me have two promos at once. Lots of information is available on my website, especially if you click this Learn More tab, a bunch of more things will open up, whereas the other tabs are more about what I'm doing. And so you can check out my blog. I've got all sorts of articles. I've got videos. I've got selected class notes, including the class notes for today. I've got where to get herbs and just all sorts of stuff underneath that section of the website. And just some quick safety rules, because I'm going to be throwing out a lot of exciting information, but I don't know what your specific health is like. As an herbalist, I'm not allowed to diagnose and prescribe anyway, but this class is definitely for general education purposes only, because I don't know your health history. So I don't know what specifically is going to be appropriate or not appropriate for you. All the herbs we're covering today are generally pretty safe for most people, but there is no one herb that is right for everybody. And so, it's always a good idea to, check in with your practitioners. You could also hire a holistic practitioner like a naturopathic doctor or an herbalist if you want specific guidance on herbal remedies, but it's a good idea to keep your doctor in the loop regardless. And then if you are going to do self-treatment, which is, if you're a relatively simple case and it's a self-limiting thing, you might be able to self-treat, but you really want to do so in a really empowered and educated way. So I highly recommend researching an herb in at least 3 different good quality resources before you start taking it on a regular basis, especially in high doses. And I've got some recommended resources on my website, as well as a variety of links on the links page. So lots of really great websites as well, in case you don't want to go out and buy books. Also equally important is listening to your body and your intuition as far as what you're drawn to. And then once you take it, like, how do you feel with it? So spend some time with each new herb that you try to just kind of like key in and listen to your body and see how that feels with you. Because ultimately, no matter what you've read, it's how your body responds to those herbs that matters most. But of course, you do want to make sure that the herbs are safe and you have a general idea of what they do, not just for the purpose that you're using them, but what are their other actions as well. I love to give the example of cinnamon because, it's a pretty safe herb for most people. It has a lot of great benefits. One of the famous ones is for blood sugar. Another famous one is to help with diarrhea, but that might also make it inappropriate for somebody because it could make somebody go hypoglycemic, especially if they take it on an empty stomach or they are on medications or they have type 1 diabetes, or it could make somebody kind of constipated if they were drinking a lot of it. So it's all about really getting to know those plants and what they do and when they're most appropriate. Also, if you're doing any harvesting, which, hopefully you are with these plants because these are things you can grow in your garden, always be sure to ensure the identity 100%. Usually if you buy something with a tag on it or somebody gives you a plant and says, this is such and such, usually you can be pretty sure, like 70% sure that that plant is what you were told it was, but it's probably only about 70% accuracy. So look up some pictures online, get some botanical descriptions, make sure that it really is what you think it is, because mistakes happen all the time for a lot of different reasons, even with really reputable garden centers and seed companies. So just make sure. Sometimes you planted it and some weed grew up instead, or, all sorts of different reasons why you might have ended up with a different plant than you thought you did. So don't take the plant tag for granted. And then last but not least, if you're on any pharmaceuticals, you can check with your pharmacist for basic herb-drug interactions. Most pharmacists, especially in New Hampshire, are pretty adept and have decent databases available to them. But, they don't necessarily know any more than what the database says unless they have a lot of training from pharmacy school. Herbalists are probably going to be even better at giving you some of that guidance, especially if you're on challenging medications or a lot of medications. That might be a good time to seek professional guidance. But if you're not on any meds or you're just on one or two and it's kind of like typical things like a thyroid medication or an antidepressant, while there are potential interactions you'd want to be aware of, it's a little easier to just talk to your pharmacist and make sure you avoid those specific things. So we're going to dive right in. Long notes online, and just kind of keying in that there are so many really amazing things that we can grow, and growing plants that are medicinal is really exciting. It's really fun. It's really empowering. Most of the plants we're talking about today are really delicious and tasty, and some of them are very aromatic, and we really connect with our medicine in a really special way. And it's incredibly enjoyable and empowering to go out and make a remedy with something in your garden that you have maybe stored in your pantry, or you just go out and harvest the plant itself, and then you feel better, whether it's for general wellness or if it's because of a specific reason why you're taking it. There's just something really exciting about having that connection. And then once you get connected with the plants, your relationship with the plant world and the world around us just changes. It's just, the world is a little bit of a friendlier place once you know the plants and recognize the plants. There are a lot of different reasons why you might want to grow herbs, and we're not going to get into all of them, but they're on that slide. And here's another link where you can download that chart, but you can also get it from the class notes page of my website. So before we dive into specific plants, obviously you're going to need to know how to harvest the plants if you're going to be working with them. And most of the plants we're covering today are plants that are leafy, that we're mostly working with the leaves, sometimes the leaves with some flowers attached, and sometimes it's just the flowers. So I'll start off with this cute little holy basil that I need to plant in my garden soon, but it's a good example because it's in the mint family, and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are in the mint family with their opposite leaves and their square stems, and they're often very aromatic leaves, and they're lipped flowers and all that good stuff. And for something like holy basil, we can use any of the aerial parts. So aerial is just kind of like above ground, but we wouldn't want to harvest it right down to the ground because then the plant would be kind of cranky with us. It's not a very nice way to treat something that's about to help support us. And so, and it would have a hard time growing back unless it's something really vigorous, like some mints and chives. You might harvest them down to the ground. But for most plants, you're going to want to leave at least a couple sets of leaves behind, and then you can harvest. So if this was growing in the ground, I definitely wouldn't want to harvest any lower than like here. don't know if you can see that in my video here, but you know, I've got a set of leaves here and a set of leaves here. So the second set of leaves, but really even that's kind of harsh, especially for this like sensitive little seedling that's just getting going. So, you know, maybe here would be even better, or really for something this small, I'd just be pinching off the flowers, and which would be encouraging bushier growth, but I can make medicine with that as well. I wouldn't, and this is something I need to be better at teaching people, I would not just like pick individual leaves off unless I was trying to thin out the plant a little bit, because when you pinch above a leaf node, so, you know, if I went right here and snipped here, these little side shoots would branch out and we would end up with, you know, 2 stems instead of 1. It would just keep getting bushier and bushier each time you harvested it. But if I just pull a leaf off the side, it really doesn't encourage the plant to grow, and it just gets leggier. It's the same if you know anything about pruning trees, pruning fruit trees and other trees, and you've got heading cuts and thinning cuts. It's the same exact perspective. And if you don't know that, you can just ignore what I just said. But basically, what we want are those heading cuts, because you're going to like kind of lop off from the top or pinch off just above that leaf node, and more growth will happen. So, and if it's something like a lot of our mint family plants that flower, if they have flowers on them, great. If they don't have flowers on them, that's fine too. And they're still, you know, kind of equally medicinal. That's not true for every plant, but it's true for a lot of them. Now, I don't have any good examples here of like the grassier plants that are in the monocot family, or the monocot category of plants. But those are things that tend to have more of a grassy thing, and especially the plants that grow right out of the ground. It's not just the grasses. But we've got lemongrass here, and there's not really a great spot to like cut it. I mean, you can actually cut it off the top, but you know, really we want the whole thing. And so for that, I would just go down and cut at the base, but I wouldn't cut all of it. I would maybe only cut like 1/3 of it. Same thing's true for parsley, even though it does have like this divided leaf. Each one of those stems that comes out of the ground for parsley is 1 leaf. And so if you really want to encourage more growth, you'd actually cut at the base, but you wouldn't cut all of them. You'd usually, you know, cut some of the older leaves, and that would encourage more of them to grow. For flowers, you would pinch off the flower head like you see in the picture there. So I'm not going to do this right now because we're going to talk about roses later on, but I would just kind of pinch right here. And then I have the flower along with, you know, usually you end up with some of the green parts, which could be sepals or bracts, depending upon what kind of flower you have. But you've got that there. And usually we just dry the whole flower head as it is, or maybe you might pull off the petals and then dry them. So that's pretty much how you'd harvest leaves and flowers. We're not going to get into barks and seeds and roots because those ones aren't as common for things in the garden, and just for the interest of time. Of course, if there is anything that's kind of like icky or gross on it, you can pick that off before you do anything more with your plant material. If they're dirty, then you might want to hose them off ahead of time. We usually don't wash our plants first, especially if our goal ultimately is to dry them, because if you get them wet and then you try to dry them, they're more likely to ferment and mold and get kind of nasty. So you're actually end up worse off than you would have been if you hadn't done anything to it. And, but you know, if you really need to, you can wash it like lettuce in cold water and then spin it and then let it air dry and then continue, pat it down a little bit, let it air dry and then continue with your recipe. But really you want to generally, if you're planning on drying things, you want to start off with plants that are dry. Like today, I just went out in the rain to grab some things to show you, but I'm not going to dry these because they're already wet and that wouldn't be very good at all. So we don't normally wash our herbs, especially if we're planning on drying them, but we want to work with clean herbs that aren't buggy or gross or anything like that. So when you're drying your herbs, ideally the best time to harvest them is usually like late morning after the dew has dried. But if you can only get to them after work, then that's fine. But try to choose a time when they're not damp from dew, whether that's late day dew or early day dew. And then you're going to harvest them if it's leaves and flowers, like we have here for this Korean licorice mint. You can leave the stems on it. It'll actually create a little bit more airflow, and then put them on drying racks or some way where they can, you know, not be too thick with plant material and dry relatively flat. If you have flowers, then those really should just do in a single layer, because flowers are kind of tricky to get dry all the way through the middles. And sometimes I use a basket. Sometimes, especially for the leafy things, I'll use baskets. I might use brown paper bags. Lately, especially since it's been so darn hot out, what I find works well is I'll first get them air drying in screens. And I just got this, hanging set of screens off of Amazon, and they fold up, which is really convenient. I let them dry most of the way, but it's too humid where I am for things to dry 100%. So then once they're pretty much dry, then I will go ahead and put them in a brown paper bag or in a basket with another basket on top of them and put them in the windshield of my car and just let them crisp up for a couple hours or so that they're 100% dry, and then I'll go ahead and process them. For flowers, I usually like to put flowers in the dehydrator because they are so much trickier to get to be 100% dry. And we don't want them to start to ferment and mold in that middle. So if you have a thermometer or a dehydrator where you can adjust the temperature, the goal is around 95 to 110 degrees, the lowest possible, where you'll still actively be drying. On a really humid day, sometimes 95 degrees isn't really warm enough, but good airflow is also a good idea, especially if you're in a really humid spot like I am. And so what I'll do when I have this hanging basket is I put a little fan underneath it so that it keeps the air flowing, just kind of speeds up the process. So let's see, I don't see any questions about that, so we'll move along. Garbling is a process of removing the leaves from the stems and crunching them up into smaller pieces. And so there's a whole slide on that there. You can also check out a Facebook video of me garbling herbs. It's pretty simple, but you do want to make sure that everything is totally crispy dry. Like it'll be really crunchy and crinkly, kind of like, you're messing with a potato chip bag, that kind of crinkly sound that you get. That's how your plant should be as you're trying to pull the leaves off the stems to get them broken down into smaller pieces. There shouldn't be any resistance or bendiness that would indicate that there's too much moisture there. And if you jar up your herbs and they're not totally dry, then you run the risk of them fermenting and molding in the jar over time. So you really want to be attentive. And at least for me, where I am in my little like weird pocket of New Hampshire, it's just too humid in the summertime for me to get things 100% dry from air drying. And if I get them crisp dry in the car or the dehydrator, but then I let them sit inside for several hours, they'll start to reconstitute a little bit because it's just that humid around here. So, if you've got the AC going or central air and the inside of your house is a little drier, or you're at the top of the hill with sun and breeze coming through, then maybe you can get it air dry. And certainly if you're in parts of the country where it is more arid, or certain times of the year when it's more arid, then air drying might be fine. But at least in my experience, usually it's hard to get things 100% air dry, crisp dry. So storing, you want to store things in tightly sealed containers and cool, dark, dry spots when you're working with most of our any of our shelf stable remedies, as well as properly dried herbs. If you've got something that's like sort of shelf stable and you want to extend it a little bit longer, like a syrup or a glycerin extract or a vinegar extract, some of those things you can store on the shelf, but you'll get longer shelf life if you put it in the refrigerator or even the freezer. And especially if you make some of these little semi-stable remedies with fresh plant material, you can do it, but the moisture from those fresh plants increases the likelihood of something going bad. So you'll want to use it up more quickly, and you'll want to maybe even keep it in the refrigerator or the freezer to extend that process a little bit longer. And there's a lot more information on that in your notes that you can check out. I also have a little quick slide here on general doses, because we're not going to get into that too much for the individual herbs. So if you're wondering later, like, how much do I take? Always start with just a little bit first, just to make sure that it agrees with you and just kind of get a feel for how your body responds to it. So, you might just start with a few drops of a liquid extract or a very small cup of tea or a little bit of it in your food. But, once you get into the groove of it and it agrees with you, you can aim for the doses that are listed on this slide. And sometimes you can take more, sometimes you can get away with less. Just listen to your body and also do your research on each individual herb as well. But these are good kind of ballparks, especially for the herbs we're talking about today. unless I state otherwise when we get to it. So let's talk about the individual plants. Yay. So I have a few of them here. Some of the ones I really wanted to feature, I was able to grab in the garden, although, you'll probably be able to see the pictures on the slides even better. But this is Korean licorice mint. Really, most of the stuff in my basket looks like, just some big green thing. Right now, this time of year, a lot of things aren't blooming yet. And, but you can see the picture there that it gets these beautiful purple spikes of flowers. It's in the mint family. And I love Korean licorice mint, which is Agastache rugosa. And Warner River Farm does sell it. And that would be one of my places to go to get it. I sometimes will share plant babies as well. You can also get anise hyssop a little bit more widely. It's very, very similar. It's very similar looking. It's similar uses. It's almost identical looking, really. And I suspect that they hybridize a little bit too. And in fact, I'm a little nervous that my anise hyssop may have crossbred with my Korean licorice mint, because I like Korean licorice mint better, at least mine. I think it tastes better. It's got like a sweet fennel honey kind of flavor, where the anise hyssop is a little sharper fennel mint kind of flavor, sort of opposite of what you would expect based on their names. But yeah, they're both pretty good though. And they're both make wonderful teas. And if you have a chance before you buy to like rub it and sniff it, the ones that are a little bit more fennel-y and sweet smelling and tasting are going to be the ones that are even yummier in the kitchen. And so you can use them pretty widely in cooking. They're naturally very sweet. They'll add that little bit of a fennel flavor. And if you've got anise hyssop, maybe it'll have a little bit of a hint of mint as well. You can use it in cooking in place of fennel seeds. You can use it in tea. I love making herbal sodas with it. So this is kind of my drink of choice this time of year, is I'll do like a sprig or two of Korean licorice mint. You can throw some pretty flowers in there. Like I have a rose in here today. And then I find that combining it with a little bit of vanilla extract, I just have like maybe a quarter to a half teaspoon of vanilla extract in this too, and seltzer water. And it kind of gets a little bit of a root beer flavor without any sugar at all. You could certainly add sugar if you wanted to, but I find that it doesn't need it. It makes an excellent tea, hot tea. It makes an excellent iced tea. It makes an excellent herbal honey. You can do all sorts of really, really nice things with it. It's great in salad dressings. It's great in various dipping sauces. Sometimes I'll make chive blossom vinegar, which is a great thing to make this time of year when the chives are in bloom. And then I will make Korean licorice mint honey or anise hyssop honey. And then if you mix the two together with a little bit of like toasted sesame oil, it makes a really delicious sort of Asian inspired salad dressing or dipping sauce. So lots of fun things that we can do with it culinary wise, and it's really pretty, especially once it starts to flower. It has a pretty long blooming season too. It's medicinally carminative, which is a common category for mint family plants. Carminatives tend to relax muscle spasms, increase digestive juices and digestive function. Sometimes they have a little bit of a relaxing effect on other parts of the body, like the nervous system as well. Korean licorice mint and anise hyssop are a little bit relaxing to the nervous system, but not dramatically so in my personal experience. They really do a nice job though when we're looking at the digestive system, kind of like our mints and fennel, be very soothing, particularly nice for like an unsettled stomach or sluggish digestion, but also gentle enough that even if you had an irritated stomach, you could usually add something like Korean licorice mint to your tea blend to improve the flavor, and it wouldn't be as harsh on the stomach as maybe peppermint might be. Like if somebody had reflux, usually they'll still do okay with something like Korean licorice mint and anise hyssop, whereas peppermint just might be a little bit too strong for them. It is very cooling and anti-inflammatory, especially if you drink it cold. So you can make that lovely, refreshing iced tea or herbal infused soda or something like that. It makes a delicious cordial, especially if you combine it with other anisey things like fennel seeds and star anise. And if you're a Sambuca fan, you'll probably enjoy that cordial. And so you can really just do a lot of things. It's also very nice for throats and respiratory health. So when I make lung teas and sore throat teas, a lot of times I'll add Korean licorice mint because it tastes good. It sweetens up the tea blend a little bit without any sugar. And then it's also very soothing, a little bit antimicrobial as well. So lots and lots of great things. And you'll notice that on the slides, I do have some general like flavors and just general vibe for the plant, as well as the basic growing conditions. Korean licorice mint, and I may not get to the growing for all of them, but you'll have it on the slides. But I find Korean licorice mint, it'll self-seed in a lot of places, but what it really likes is good soil. I have seen reports that it does fine in like bad soil, and it will sort of grow in bad soil, but at least watching it grow in my yard where it's the happiest and the most robust is where I have really nice, rich, good soil. It does pretty well in like part shade to full sun, as long as it's got, you know, it doesn't get too dried out and it's got that good soil to grow in. Whereas if it's, you know, really dry and, you know, not very good soil, really sandy soil, which we have a lot of out here in New Hampshire, they might grow, but they tend to be a little bit more spindly and, you know, a little bit more anemic looking than the ones that are in those good soil places. And really most of the plants that we're talking about grow in this sort of similar environment. They don't want to be really stagnant. They just want a little bit of moisture, might even do okay without any watering at all, as long as they've got like, you know, it doesn't get too dried out in the bed in which they are. I have some that grow beautifully in an area that doesn't get any drip irrigation, but it gets a little bit of shade and the soil's really nice and rich and it's just a little bit protected, and that's beautiful. And then I have other Korean licorice mint that grows gorgeously in my regular beds that are full sun with drip irrigation and mulch and all that other good stuff. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box. Making a tea, very simple. Usually we do it with dried plant material, although with fresh aromatic herbs, you can usually use those as well. But typically with tea, we're talking about using dried herbs because they release themselves to the hot water more readily. And so you'll use anywhere from like 1 heaping teaspoon to maybe a heaping tablespoon of dried herb per cup, and let it steep for at least 5 to 15 minutes. Often I'd let things steep longer. And with most of our herbal teas, they still come out quite nicely. They just get more medicinally potent. It's not like green and black tea where it gets bitter or unpleasant usually with that longer steeping time. So whatever works for you. Start with a little bit, see how you like it, then you could just kind of keep going stronger based off of taste. Fennel, I'm gonna skip on by, but that's a great one as well. I particularly love growing bronze fennel because it's really, sometimes it comes back and it's really beautiful, it tastes good, and you can make all sorts of great remedies with the seeds and the fronds. And the fronds color things, you know, either purple to magenta, depending upon what remedy you're using. So there's a little bit of information in that slide about how to make vinegar, but really a lot of herbal remedies are just like you shove things in a jar, you cover them with your solvent of choice, whether it's water for tea or vinegar for a vinegar extract or honey for a honey extract or alcohol for an alcohol extract. And then you shake it pretty regularly. You let it steep for 2, sometimes 4 weeks and strain it out. And then you've got your remedy. Of course, with teas, you don't wait that long because it's not a preservative, but with other things like vinegar and honey and glycerin and alcohol, that's kind of your basic, what we call a maceration in herbal medicine making. And many of your remedies can be made that way. You could also do an oxymel, which is kind of fun. And in that you use a combination of honey and vinegar. You can use any kind of vinegar, but apple cider vinegar is particularly popular, especially like a raw organic one. And you can do anywhere from like a 50-50 honey vinegar, or you can use more vinegar and less honey based off of taste. And that sometimes people like better than a straight vinegar extract because the sweetness kind of softens that vinegar sharpness a little bit. And the vinegar has a decent shelf life. But with fresh plant material, you do have to be a little bit more careful about things going bad on you because that can happen. Sometimes they last a long time on the shelf. Sometimes they don't. I'm not a food safety specialist, so I can't tell you exactly how long. And it also varies pretty widely from batch to batch. If you were going to be doing commercial like selling of things, you would definitely want to check in with cooperative extensions in New Hampshire and Maine and get your products tested. So stinging nettle, this one's one that you may not want to grow because it does technically sting, and your housemates or significant others might be pretty disappointed in you that you have planted a stinging weed that spreads rampantly in their yard, because it will just kind of reach out and sting you as you're mowing the lawn or trying to get into the house or something like that. But we as herbalists are kind of crazy, and we love growing stinging nettles because it's a really great plant. So if you don't want to grow it, which is understandable, you could potentially find somebody else who has some growing. Just make sure you've correctly identified it, because there are a lot of mint family plants and even some other plants that look a lot like nettles, but most of them don't sting. So we've got some nettle right here. It gets really droopy pretty quickly after you cut it, but it looks kind of like a mint family plant. It's a sort of squarish stem. It's got opposite leaves. It is not really aromatic. It's got these hairs on it that you can't see in the picture in my video, but you can definitely see it in the slides. This is like little syringes. They're technically called trichomes. And if you've heard that term, it's also what like cannabis has, where all those, fun cannabinoids are. But in nettle, it's not anything that's going to get you high or relaxed. It's actually neurotransmitters like histamine and formic acid and a little bit of serotonin and other odds and ends. And so when you brush against it, it actually makes you break out into a rash. So urticaria is the Latin name for rash, like hives, and urtica is the genus name for nettle. I'm not quite sure which got the name first, but they're definitely based on the same Latin roots. One of the differences between this and mint family plants, so you get a couple of them. One is that it has stinging hairs. The mint family plants do not. Two, it has this little like fringy things, these fringy, I don't know if I quite call them bracts, but it almost looks like with Kermit the Frog, and he's got that little like ruffle around his neck. Kind of looks a little bit like that. Also, the stem, Jim McDonald calls it like two cocktail straws stuck together. And the flowers, when it does flower, that has male and female flowers, but they're so tiny, it's kind of hard to look at their private parts. But this, I believe, is the female one. But they have these like seedy, poofy little itty bitty strings of flowers, as opposed to your typical mint family lipped things. So lots of different ways to tell them apart. And this is super duper nutritious. It is loaded with minerals, particularly calcium, loaded with chlorophyll, pretty high in protein, especially if you're going to like eat it as a powder or make a really, really strong tea or make pesto or something like that with it. I love to make ice cubes with it. So what I do, usually a little earlier in the season, I'll like pick the young branches. So kind of right about here, but sometimes even earlier than that, when the stems don't get too stringy. And then I'll just cook it down a little bit, because you do need to cook it and freeze it and do things like that to get rid of the sting. So I'll cook it down, get it nice and like concentrated, and then I will put it in a blender, puree it, and then I freeze it in ice cube trays. And I usually just have a tiny bit of water just to get it to start steaming. And that's great. If I had something that was at this stage, I could still do that, but the stems are going to be too stringy. So I would just use the leaves. And so I might just kind of go in, and I often will handle it by mostly using my scissors to do most of the handling for me. Also, usually your fingertips are a little tougher, and so they might be able to carefully, but if I brush up against this part on my more sensitive parts of my skin, then I will get a little bit of hives from that. There is some therapeutic value to being stung. Sometimes you'll find that you get a little bit of a temporary relief from like achy joints and maybe even allergies and that kind of thing. If you do what they call like I can't remember the name for it now, but basically you're hitting yourself with the nettles. And it's not fun. It's not for the faint of heart, because you do break it. It stings like you got bit with a bunch of little fire ant bites or a little bit of baby stings. And it takes a little while, sometimes even a couple hours, for that sting to go away. But sometimes people will find that the inflammation in that area also goes away once your body sends out those anti-inflammatory compounds. But you can make other remedies with it without getting stung, just handling it carefully, maybe with some gloves on, and then you can make those ice cubes. And I throw my ice cubes into soup, casseroles, smoothies, especially smoothies, and because they're already prepared, they're just really easy to throw into stuff. You can dry it and make tea with it. I often just buy my dried nettles to make tea with, and it's a great tea herb to do really strong teas or mild teas. The flavor is like okay, it's kind of like spinach tea. It's sort of got a very green, verdant flavor as you would expect from this is like a supreme leafy green. Great for bone support, overall vitality, thyroid, and overall endocrine health, just because it's like so nutritious and it's so rich in all different kinds of minerals. So it does also have some benefit for allergies, and you'll get the most benefit for allergies from the fresh plant. So making like a fresh plant tincture or possibly a fresh plant vinegar does work kind of nicely, both in the moment for allergies and to take on a regular basis for allergies. Mostly we use it for its nutritive benefits like those minerals, and tinctures, alcohol extracts do not extract the minerals, but they will extract some of the other properties. So if I'm going for nutrition, I'm not going to do an alcohol extract. I'll do a vinegar or a tea, or I'll just eat it in a variety of different formats. And that's usually how I'll work with it. You can also buy stinging nettle if you're like, I don't want to plant something that stings and spreads and grows by underground root runners and sends off seeds and then shows up in your compost pile and then ends up in your compost. And now whenever you put your compost, you have little baby nettle seedlings popping up. So you may just decide to like go to your friend's, organic farm where that might be growing in the rich soil somewhere and go harvest it there. Milky oat seed, which is our oats, the same oats we use as a cover crop. We can use the seeds as a nervous system support, and we can use the straw or like kind of all the aerial parts while it's still happy and verdant for a nutritious herb. And so there are a lot of things you can do with that. I'm not going to talk about it too much because we don't tend to grow it, but it is easy to grow if you want to play around with it. I have a patch of it growing right now in an old chicken run. Super infusion or a nourishing infusion is one of the best ways to make a tea with really mineral rich plants or other really safe tonic like plants that you would want a lot of. And in that you're using a lot of plant material. It's like a whole ounce per 32-ounce container. So that's a French press in the photo. And I weighed out 1 ounce of a mix of different nutritious herbs and cover it with hot water, and then usually let it steep for 4 hours or more. And you get more minerals than you would get out of your typical tea by quite a bit, like up to maybe 300 to 500 milligrams of calcium per cup of nettle versus maybe like 20 to 40, if that, of the normal tea. So pretty cool. There is a risk for growing bacteria in them because they just sort of steep at room temp for a long time. And if you have heavy metals in your plants, you will also extract the heavy metals in your plants. You could also do a decoction, which is where you simmer, and that will do a great job extracting the minerals. It will also, and it doesn't allow germs to grow as easily, but it will also extract the heavy metals. So just be aware of getting these nutritious plants, especially from clean soils that are not contaminated with heavy metal. Marshmallow is a lovely, lovely herb that I more recently added to this lecture because I'm just using it more and more personally as my tea herbs. And, you can use it in other ways too, but tea is really the classic way. And we most famously use marshmallow root, which you see there, which is very like slimy and mucilaginous, a little bit of a sweet flavor to it, sweet in herbal terms, not sweet as in like candy terms. And they did originally make marshmallow candies from marshmallow root and that like sticky gooiness, the mucilage that's in it, but now they don't make it with that. There was also a lot of sugar and vanilla extract used in those initial marshmallow candies. But I like to use the leaves from my garden because it's easy to harvest those. That said, you can also harvest the roots in the fall. I know herbalist Jim McDonald, I've not done a whole lot of root harvest personally, but he's commented on how you can dig it up, chop off a bunch of roots, leave some of them still there, and then throw it right back in the ground. And it probably has a little bit of a headache, but then it keeps growing the next season. I haven't done that. I usually just harvest the leaves, and I get so much plant material out of just like 1 or 2 really happy plants. If it's happy, it can get like taller than I am. And this like one plant can get really big and robust. So that Same kind of garden scenario that I talked about for Korean licorice mint, and maybe even a little bit like slightly shadier. This is a plant that wants to grow in the meadow. So it likes to be kind of moist, rich soil, and some sun, but not like really harsh beating sun. It doesn't really like it when it's crazy hot, and it definitely doesn't want to get too dried out. But in that kind of moist, this is a cool, moist plant, energetically speaking. We use it for hot, dry situations. And it's got a nice sort of sweet, fresh flavor to it, especially the leaves. So I just dry the leaves and add them to teas. And you can also use the roots, which are a little bit more slimy, but a little bit more effort to harvest and process and dry. It's also a really great black background flavor. Nettle is a decent background flavor too, but this is a little bit gentler of a flavor. So if you just want something to kind of round out the flavor of a tea blend, marshmallow is really nice. Like I'll do, peppermint's great, but peppermint and marshmallow actually tastes even better. Or peppermint and nettle, you get like nutritious and the little peppermint to flavor, but they're pretty strong flavors. And then you add the marshmallow leaf and it just kind of like softens and lightens the flavor in a really nice way. The mucilage that you get in the leaves as well as the roots and also the flowers is really nice for soothing, healing, easing irritation, especially in the gastrointestinal tract. So if your digestive system, and you can use it for your throat, you can use it for your lungs, even though it doesn't really make contact with that, but it still seems to help. And you can also use it for the stomach. So it's a classic one in gut healing teas or teas that are geared for folks who have like gastritis and acid reflux and irritations and inflammation and that kind of thing. You might need other ingredients as well. And, you might also need medical care depending upon what's going on, but regularly consuming these teas often will be very soothing immediately. And then over time can be really helpful and therapeutic. There are some people that don't digest the starches and mucilage very well, and it makes them kind of gassy, and it may even have the opposite effect where it increases reflux. These are people who might get more reflux when they eat bread or beans or something like that. That's probably because of dysbiosis or not really healthy gut flora, or gut flora that's growing further up the digestive tract than ideal. And so if that's a problem, then you probably want to get some advice on how to address that, and then maybe go back to marshmallow once your gut is in better gear. But that would be something like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so that's a sign that things are out of balance and you'll need to do other things, and marshmallow might not be the right herb for you. That said, most people do okay with the marshmallow leaves. It's usually the marshmallow root, or especially the marshmallow root powder, that's super high in mucilage that can be a little bit more irritating for those specific groups of sensitive people. So otherwise, really great herb, pretty easy to grow once you get it started. So next up, we have lemongrass and lemon verbena. And I didn't grab my lemongrass because it's like really barely anything to it this time of year, but I do have a little bit of lemon verbena here. You can see that I've actually already cut off the tip here. And because I did that, we've got all these little baby leaves that are coming out. And in fact, this is a plant that is whorls of 3 usually. Can see that there, but there are 3 leaves in a whorl around the stems. And so because I pinched off the end and it's 3 leaf nodes, I'm going to end up with 3 new branches that come off of it. So if I just keep, periodically just harvesting, especially this time of year, I don't do very many big harvests because the plants are still pretty small, but I'll just go through and kind of pinch off tops. So I have a little bit to make my tea in the morning or put into my water. And also it just encourages the plants to keep growing, and it makes them even more healthy and vital. And so I just do little harvests, and then later in the season when it's really robust, then I can go in a little bit more harshly and really like give it a pretty strong haircut. So lemon verbena, this is it in flower here. Sometimes you see it flower, a lot of times it doesn't flower. And lemon verbena smells like really lovely. It's like this lemon cake kind of smell. It's the nicest smelling of all the lemony herbs that I personally work with. It's from the tropics, as is the lemongrass. The lemongrass has a little bit more of like a Fruit Loopy kind of lemoniness. A lot of times lemongrass flavoring is used as a lemony flavoring in different cereals and other things. And let's see, what else do I want to say about lemongrass's flavor? Also, if you enjoy Southeast Asian cooking like Thai cuisine, then you've probably had a lot of lemongrass because it's very classically used in various soups and stews and Thai curries and those kinds of recipes. It's really delicious. And so this is lemongrass here. And after I've cut it down at the base, I get two different parts to use as medicine. The bottom is this very like tightly woven, tightly rolled base. And that's what we usually use for cooking. It's tough, like we don't normally eat grasses as human beings. We're not designed for it, but you can just simmer it in your soup stocks. Or if you puree it really well, like when you're making those Thai curry pastes, you might chop it up coarsely and then throw it in the blender and make a puree with that and other ingredients. And usually folks do okay taking it that way, but you wouldn't just be like chomping on a lemongrass stalk. It's not gonna, it's just very fibrous. And also the lemongrass, the sides of the leaves are kind of cut you up a little bit. They're easy paper cut plant. You can use those fronds, usually in cooking, we just throw those away or compost them, but in herbal medicine, they make great teas. You can make lovely cordials. You can do all sorts of nice things with those lemongrass tops. And so I usually dry them whole, and then I'll go in later on and chop them up into smaller pieces once they're dry and use that for tea. And lemongrass holds its flavor longer than most of your other lemony things, but all your lemon herbs have a very, very ephemeral flavor. And so they don't last very long, and it's pretty much worthless to buy them in commerce. It's the kind of thing that you want to grow and dry and have your own, and it'll be amazing. But then if you try to buy it from a big distributor and then you get it, it's just going to be kind of like hay or something. It just doesn't taste like much at all. The lemon verbena, it's got this lovely flavor, but it's also got this kind of like a little bit more of like an almost bitter green flavor underneath. And I find that when you combine it with vanilla, kind of like with the Korean licorice mint, vanilla just really like uplifts the flavor, gives it more of that lemon cake kind of aroma. And I also love to use sprigs of this. That's why this was pinched. I use sprigs of this in my green or my black tea in the morning, and I'll just take a little fresh sprig and add it to it to give a little bit of flavor. Lemongrass, lemon verbena, both tropical, tender perennial plants. They want to be someplace hot and humid and moist and with rich soil and with lots of sun. So you want to try to replicate that, and they will not survive the winter. So you either have to bring them in the winter, or what I personally do, because they're not that easy to overwinter, I usually just cut them all back before frost. And then I get a new seedling and put it out in the springtime. So that's where I'm at right now. But some people do bring them in the wintertime and then put them back out in the springtime. I tried, but I decided that for these particular plants, they were not worth overwintering for me. They medicinally have an uplifting quality and a calming, relaxing quality. Most of our lemony scented plants have that, like lemon balm, lemongrass, lemon verbena. It's just very like gently uplifting and calming at the same time. They also have this really great like high antioxidant degreasing kind of action for the digestive system. So if you're having a heavy meal, or your stomach is just like, oh, like I probably shouldn't have eaten that, or maybe you have nervous indigestion, and so when you get nervous, your digestive system kind of cramps up, and then you're not digesting your food very well. Lemongrass, lemon verbena, lemon balm, which we'll get to shortly, those are all great considerations to have alongside to just kind of like improve digestion and help you feel better while relaxing the nervous system a little bit as well. So that's just a little bit about those. Definitely some favorites of mine. And here's just a quick tip on how to make infused seltzer or infused cold waters. Medicinally speaking, when we're working with cold water and also fresh plants, they usually don't get very strong. It's nowhere near as medicinally potent as making a hot tea, and especially a hot tea with dry plants. You're not going to get as many constituents or different types of properties out of the plant. However, you do a nice job getting a lot of the aromatics, which is what we love about a lot of these plants. And it's just going to be kind of light, Often it's a little bit sweeter because you're not getting all those other kind of like heavier, more bitter, more astringent properties, tannins or some of the astringent properties that can be a little bit bitter in some of the plants. And because you don't get as much of that in a cold extraction, you amplify the flavor of those aromatics. So it's also more refreshing. Personally, when it's hot out, I enjoy drinking infused waters that are kind of like water with a little something special versus a really strong tea that my body is like, oh, like I'm exhausted and now you're giving me medicine. Like, no, thank you. You can add sweetener to it if you want to. You can use carbonated or not carbonated water. I love getting glass containers so I can see them because they're pretty, especially if you throw some edible flowers in there. And yeah. If you do carbonation, you'll want to make sure that you have something that can handle the carbonation, like these little bottles like this. I got these on Amazon. My original ones I got at the cooking store in Portsmouth, but last I checked, they don't have them anymore. Fermentation stores, supply stores, brew places, although usually those are going to be darker glass. You could just reuse a mason jar. That's totally fine. I kind of like the narrower top so that it kind of keeps everything in. It is tricky to get them out later on. I have to fill it with a little bit of water and kind of like, or take some tweezers and pull them out at the end of the day. But I personally like having them in bottles like this, but whatever works for you is totally fine. Just if you're using carbonated water, you need to make sure that your container can handle being closed and not just explode or burst the top off or something like that. But for still water, totally fine. You just throw a couple sprigs in, cover them with your water, your carbonated water or your plain water, let them sit for 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe longer. And usually you want to drink them that day because they'll start to get kind of funky by the end of the day, especially certain herbs that are not very good in preservative. Roses do take a couple hours before you start to get the rosy flavor, but a lot of other aromatic plants like holy basil is a really lovely one. Fennel fronds are another really nice one. Korean licorice mint. Usually those you start to get some flavor pretty quickly, especially holy basil. Holy basil tastes great really fast. I'll also use things like salad burnet. If you happen to have these plants on hand, salad burnet or meadowsweet, and throw just like a little bit of the leaf of that. And that just gives a little sweetness. Violet, like the common Soria violets, Viola Soria, those also give a little bit of this like just kind of like slightly sweet, fresh, like almost melon-like flavor to it. So I like throwing those in there too. And pretty flowers. This makes you like stop and sip the roses. You guys are really quiet. There's a slide for cordials, which is basically alcohol and something sweet, and you make an extract with those. And then lemon balm. Love lemon balm. We actually did get a harvest of lemon balm already this year because I have one patch that was already getting quite tall. So we just did a big tincture of that just this past week. But, some of the other ones are not as big as the really happy one in my perfect garden. So this is a perennial. It will come back most years. Some years it decides it was too cold and there wasn't enough snow and it doesn't come back. But usually those years are the years it self-seeds. It can be kind of invasive in some yards. So just watch out for that. But there's so many great ways that we can use it. Like I feel like I could teach for almost an hour on lemon balm alone because it's just one of my favorites. It's one of the first plants I ever had a connection with. And it just is a really, really lovely plant with a lot of medicinal uses. I go through quite a bit of it in my clinical practice. And my clients tell me that this, my own lemon balm tincture that I make, which you can make one the same exact way, is much, much better and more potent than what they buy in the stores, even from really good companies. And I think maybe it's a concentration, maybe it's how I make it, which I'm going to teach you how in just a moment, or maybe it's because it doesn't have a really long shelf life. And I think that maybe what's sold in the market is not made with as much fresh plant material and that it's not being refreshed regularly. So even with the tincture, which normally alcohol extracts or tinctures have like a 6 to 10 year or longer shelf life. In the case of something like lemon balm, I usually try to turn it over within 3 years because I find that after a while, it starts to lose its lemoniness and it also starts to lose its medicinal edge. But what do I use it for? I use it for all sorts of different things. And if you grow grow lemon balm, feel free to put that in the chat box, or if there are any of these plants that you grow, feel free to plug that in there, what plant you grow and what you like to do with it. But with lemon balm, if you have any favorite things you do with lemon balm, just mention lemon balm and then what you like to do with it. But I will talk about what I like to do with it. So it has a little bit of a lemon pledge flavor. It's okay. It doesn't taste as good as the lemongrass and the lemon verbena, but it is a little bit more medicinal. It has a long history of use throughout the Mediterranean and the Middle East in particular, and through Europe as well. And we use it to calm, uplift, not surprising. It's in that lemony group. And there are some good studies that support its use in this way. It does have some mild antidepressant actions. It's probably a little bit more potent for this than some of our other herbs are. It makes a great companion with other uplifting, quote unquote, antidepressant herbs like St. John's wort or Mimosa albizia. And it goes really nicely with holy basil in teas and infused waters and with seltzer and tinctures. They're really good friends. And the holy basil, which we'll talk about in a little bit, perks up the flavor of the lemon balm quite nicely. It's nice that it's relaxing, but it's not too sedating. So for folks who need support for irritation, agitation, anxiety, hyperactivity, impulsivity, this is a plant that can do a nice job bringing that down a notch, but usually without making you feel too sleepy. And in fact, there are a lot of studies showing that lemon balm has benefits for cognition, particularly the aromatics of lemon balm. So having something like a freshly made tea or that tincture or inhaling it, that seems to be best. You can work with the essential oil, but the essential oil is really, really, really expensive. Like a 1 ounce bottle is about $1,000 if you have non-adulterated lemon balm essential oil. So that's out of my price range. It's probably out of yours too. So I just work with the plant itself, which is very easy to grow. And a lot of people have it. And when you have it, it can get pretty abundant as well. Lots of good studies on cognition. Using it within just 1 hour boosted cognition and relieved anxiety to some extent. And then using it regularly will provide even better results. It is also a little bit of a blood sugar lowering herb, a little bit of a hypoglycemic. So you want to be a little careful about that, especially if you're having it as like a strong tea, unsweetened on an empty stomach. Might want to think twice about that if you tend towards hypoglycemia or if you're on diabetes medications or something like that. But it's usually pretty gentle, and in the doses that we typically are using it in is not a big problem. And it is a little bit astringent, tightening and toning. It's very antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. It may even have some mild benefits for things like cholesterol, but probably not a like knock your socks off thing. It's also really nice for stress and tension that also coincide with things like heart palpitations and just like, that kind of heart tension, not cardiovascular disease so much as just like stress with a little bit of a heart component to it. Motherwort is not one that we're talking about today, but that's another really good one for that. And it blends really well with lemon balm for that. It is excellent topically for herpes, and you can also take it internally because it is a little bit of an antiviral internally as well as externally, and specifically for herpes, possibly also the cold and flu, and maybe even, I don't think there's any actual research on this, but possibly even COVID-19. I know there's an herbalist, Andrew Bentley, who has found that a lot of people felt better. It wasn't like it got rid of their COVID infection, but that they just felt a little bit less stressed and less difficulty with their infection temporarily when they had lemon balm. And it may even have some general support for prevention. Probably not going to keep you from getting the cold or flu or something like that, but just maybe make it a little bit less severe, just put the odds a little bit more in your favor. And with herpes, it's pretty amazing. So like cold sores being one of the classic things that I have had a lot of students and clients try it out for. Usually we use the tincture. You can also use creams. That's what's mostly researched and used in places like Germany. But the creams with the essential oil is out of my price range. So I use the tincture. And so folks will take a little bit internally, dilute it in water, and then dab a little bit externally. It does burn because of the alcohol. So if you had it in more sensitive areas, you might not want to do that. But what lemon balm does is very similar to how elderberry helps act as a little bit of an antiviral. So what they'll do is at the early onset of an infection, or when you know you're susceptible, but especially for this and herpes, you usually use it at that like first little tingle, and they go in and they block out the receptors for the virus, because the viruses would normally go in through receptors in your cells, break into the cells, reprogram your cells to make more viruses. And then those viruses would kind of explode out of the cell and damage the cell. And so that's kind of what's happening. And what this is going to do is at the early onset, it helps block out more of those, so it just can't get into the cells. So therefore, it's much more useful at that early onset. But if you already have a full-blown outbreak, there's no harm in taking it, but it's going to be less specific for that. It's better in that early onset. And so many people have been really excited by how well that has worked for them. So I'll tell you shortly how to make the tincture. It is also a digestive remedy because it's carminative and aromatic, like we were talking about with Korean licorice mint. It's also a little bit bitter, just a tiny bit, and bitter things also tend to stimulate and support digestion as well. So it's just a really nice, gentle one. It's a pretty kid-friendly herb. I would always refer in pregnancy or nursing to work with a professional who specializes in that, because that's not my specialty. But often this is one that folks might be comfortable using in small amounts. But again, I would defer to your midwife or your naturopathic doctor or your pregnancy specialist herbalist for that. Really easy to make at home. So we have some comments here. Let's see. I grow lemon balm, which has spread and naturalized well. Yes, it has a way of doing that. I feed it to the chickens. I use leaves in salad mixes. I make tea with it, and I'm interested in the tincture. Awesome. There was even a really cool study where they were looking at the antioxidant profile of salad, and they looked at the salad on its own, and then they added lemon balm and marjoram leaves. And because most of our culinary herbs are high in antioxidant compounds, and it just dramatically synergized the antioxidants in the salad itself and made it even more antioxidant rich. Beth says, I make an herb goat cheese with lemon balm and whatever else seems good, like chives and basil, etc. That sounds delicious. And it's also good with catnip to help with sleep when you're sick. So yes, catnip actually has a lot of similar properties to lemon balm and Korean licorice mint for like digestion and also being a little bit relaxing. It's also got a little bit of like mild mint type properties as well. I don't use catnip as much as I should. So to make an alcohol extract, you can do it with fresh or dry plant, but with lemon balm, I would highly recommend doing fresh plant because it works a lot better that way. It's just something that you can still dry it and make great teas, but it really is even more medicinal and even more potent in its fresh form. And so in a lot of these plants, if I have access to them fresh, I'll do a fresh plant tincture. The nice thing about alcohol is it's really good at preserving things, so you don't run as great of a risk of something going bad on you. And it has a very long shelf life in general. But for sensitive plants like the lemon balm, I tend to want to refresh them every few years. But with most other plants, they can last for like up to 10 years. So I would just chop this up really coarsely, as you see in the picture, and then shove as much as you can humanly fit in the jar. Some herbalists use a lot less plant material, but I was taught by Michael Moore, and like we really get a lot of plant material in there. And then I would use the highest proof alcohol that you can get. So when it says 95%, that's 95% alcohol, which is 190 proof. And there is a video and details and some charts on my blog about tincturing. And I recommend checking that out because it's really easy to get confused about like proof and percents and like, what am I talking about? So I'm referring to like the actual in the bottle, how much of that bottle of spirit of vodka or grain alcohol is alcohol versus water, not you taking 80 proof vodka and then cutting it with water, because now it's going to get even less alcohol. So you can't get 190 proof alcohol in New Hampshire anymore, unfortunately, but you can get 151, and that will work really nicely as a substitute. You can use other proofs like 80 proof, cut the proof in half, and that's how much alcohol there is. So if it's 80 proof, it's 40% alcohol. If it's 151, then it's 75% alcohol. If it's 100 proof, then cut that in half, it's 50% alcohol. So you can use any of those, but with the fresh plant extracts, the higher proof, the better, especially because if you get any like more when your final extract, because you are going to get water out of that fresh plant as well. And if your final extract ends up with less than about 20 to 25% pure alcohol in it, it does run the risk of going bad. So very rare with tinctures, but it is possible, especially with something like lemon balm that's so juicy if you just weren't using enough alcohol. Dry plants, kind of similar, except I would use a scale, and for every 1 ounce of dried herb, I would use 5 ounces by volume of your alcohol. And for this, 50% alcohol or 100 proof vodka is better because you don't have any water content in the plant itself. And there are a few plants like elder and alder and cherry bark that are actually safer and better to do dry, but mostly we do dry tinctures when the fresh is not available. And for something like lemon balm, or if you have commercial, like not directly from the farm or your garden dried holy basil, those are not that impressive in their dry forms, and so they're kind of less useful as a dry plant tincture. But other things like, say, bee balm would make a great dry plant tincture because it still retains its properties nicely once it's dry. There's a little tiny ant on my, I think I got it, on my camera, so I don't want it to crawl across the camera. It's ant season right now. So let's see, we have a good question here. I have used Graves for tincture. Do you recommend anything specific? I think maybe there might be some words missing. Were you saying that you were using lemon balm as a tincture for Graves? Graves is actually, I should say too, Graves disease is very, while herbs can sometimes be supportive, it's a very dangerous condition that can be life-threatening and for which herbs only sometimes help. And grain alcohol. Okay, we'll just, as an aside, if you have Graves' disease, which is a hyperthyroid state, sometimes herbs can help, but you'll want professional guidance because sometimes the herbs don't work at all. And sometimes people die because the herbs didn't work and they were resistant to the conventional treatment that usually works better. But as far as Graves alcohol, I think you mean grain alcohol. I could be wrong, but grain alcohol is usually 151 or the 190. It's usually 75 to 100 proof, and that would be great. So you can definitely use grain alcohol for your fresh plant tinctures. If you were going to use them for dry, I would probably cut it with some distilled or filtered water because it's too high. It's usually too high of a percent for dry plants, but for fresh plants, that would be what I would personally use. After about a month or longer, you can strain it out, and then that's what you're going to use is what you've strained out. And usually because the alcohol is so high, you'll need to dilute it in a little bit of water and then take it that way. You usually don't put it directly in your mouth. You just put it in like a little shot glass or dilute it with just a little water and then take it. But it's really nice. Oh, I see a picture. Is that a picture of, I'm going to guess it's a brand maybe? Graves brand. I've never heard of Graves brand grain alcohol. So I would just look to see what the proof is and then go from there. But I would assume that you can use that. I've never seen that particular one before. So holy basil, another really, really amazing one. And we'll do a few more herbs and then I'll take questions. And if we still have time, maybe I'll cover a few extra herbs. So be thinking about what kinds of questions you want to ask. But we've got some holy basil here. And this one I haven't planted in the garden yet because I just picked it up from one of my local growers. This one came from Bee Fields Farm in Wilton, New Hampshire. And she has amazing, Leora is the woman who runs that. And she has amazing quality like teas and remedies that she makes. Holy basil from commerce, like as a dry plant, getting dry plant teas or just a bulk herb from our big, herb houses that do that. They're coming from all over the world and it's just not that good. Like you really want to get it from your own garden or directly from a farm. And it'll be so much better and so much yummier. There are a lot of different kinds. They all are pretty interchangeable, but I personally grow the Kapoor or the temperate Tulsi that comes most likely from Africa, maybe also India as well, but most of the other holy basils come from India. And it is just a really lovely herb. There are a lot of different varieties and names and species, but all the Tulsi or holy basil plants are relatively interchangeable. And so most of our basils in general are going to be antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. They support digestion. They tend to support focus. Those are some of the biggies. They're a little bit supportive for the immune system as well. So all, culinary basils, cinnamon basil, Thai basil, they're all pretty useful. But holy basil and Tulsi are kind of special in that they also have more of an overt stress relieving, nervous system supportive property to them. And they also are adaptogenic. So adaptogens are herbs that help our body adapt to stress through possibly a couple different mechanisms, but one of them is by modulating stress hormones. And usually they don't just put it in one way or another, but they're more balancing to stress hormones like cortisol. And so that if you are taking them regularly and then you get exposed to stress, instead of just like jumping into fight or flight right away, you just sort of stay in this pretty decent state. Some are a little bit more zippy and energizing. Holy basil is one that's kind of like calming and relaxing at the same time. Not too sedating, great companion to lemon balm, which is not an adaptogen, but it is a nervine. Nervines, which both holy basil and lemon balm are herbs that nourish and support the nervous system. So holy basil's fun because we get a twofer. It's an adaptogen and a nervine. It is really nice for focus. It's great for anxiety support for most people. It can be really helpful in times of grief. It just is so great at so many things. It is also a blood sugar lowering herb. It's particularly nice when you're having sugar cravings related to stress. And, like when you're just running and you're stressed and you're not eating properly. And then you're like, oh, a donut, doesn't that sound wonderful? Have a donut. I'm not good with willpower. If I really want something that I want, I'm not going to be very good at not having it. Holy basil is going to be helpful because it is useful for that stress support. And then at the same time, it's also very balancing to blood sugar. So you may find that when you have your holy basil after a nice healthy meal, that you feel more stable throughout the day and that you're less apt to jump into that stress state. And then you're also less apt to have stress related sugar cravings. Because when you're feeling stressed, one of the things your body does, because it thinks, oh, we need to fight or flee the saber-toothed tiger, we need sugar as fuel in order to do that. And so when you're stressed, your body will actually flood the bloodstream with sugar from storage, even if you haven't eaten it, for that perceived stress. And then you end up with this like blood sugar roller coaster. And when the roller coaster goes down, you're like, oh, like now I need more sugar to keep going. So stress, even regardless of what you're eating, tends to put us in a more of a like blood sugar instability, insulin resistance kind of state, pre-diabetes kind of state, especially with regular stress. And also when you're in that state, you're going to start to crave more sugar. So you're more likely to start to eat more sugar. So holy basil, one of the herbs that we can use to kind of help break that cycle a little bit. That's also very enjoyable, delicious. Most people really like holy basil. It also blends really well with lemon balm for that use as well. And really nice to have, with dinner. Just be aware that because it is blood sugar lowering, if you're having it, say, on an empty stomach, or if you're on diabetes medications, there is a risk that it could make your blood sugar go too low. So I personally am a little bit sensitive to hypoglycemia. So I wouldn't have a really strong lemon balm tea on an empty stomach unsweetened, but I might make an energy drink with it where I might take it and then just add a little bit of honey to it and maybe a pinch of salt and have it iced or hot or whatever is appropriate for the season. And with that little bit of honey in it, it tastes good, but also it helps prevent that hypoglycemia if you were having it, when you weren't going to be eating. But you'll get more of the blood sugar benefits if you have it not sweetened at the same time as your meal, and then it'll help your body deal with that blood sugar. Not every herb is right for everybody. So I have had a couple people for whom holy basil just didn't agree with them. A few random people where it actually made them feel anxious, which isn't typical, but a few people. And then also a few people that felt so like relaxed and weirdly blissed out that they kind of felt like they were high with holy basil. It's not like cannabis or something like that, but it is pretty potent, especially for some people. And so it might be a good one to try out first at night or on the weekend, just to see how your body responds to it. But most people consider it a good herb for energy and stress and focus and all that good stuff. Oh, I did also have it here on thyroid. So with thyroid, there's some animal studies that suggest that it may be inhibiting the conversion of less active thyroid hormone T4 into the more active T3 format. That's just been in animals in really high doses, and I've never seen any indications of that in people. A lot of my clients who have hypothyroid still use holy basil and don't seem to have any problems with it. So I'm not too concerned about it, but I would just sort of keep it in mind. Also, there may be some fertility inhibiting, like in the moment actions to it. It's not like it's definitely not an anti-contraception plant, but if you were trying to get pregnant, or if you were pregnant, you probably wouldn't want to be using holy basil during that time, although later you could bring it back in again when you're no longer pregnant. But you can also refer to your specialist for that. And I apologize, I don't know what my screen is doing, but it's just like wonging in and out of different night and day modes. So apologies if you can see my face changing in that reflected light. So glycerin extracts are sweet tasting, but they don't have any sugar impact, alcohol-free remedies. And there are a couple different ways that you can make them, 2 of which are listed there and more are listed on the blog. Way back when I showed you that dose page on the slide, there's a link on there to go to my website's remedy page. And I have kind of a whole blog about how to make all sorts of different remedies, as well as deeper blogs on certain topics like body care or tinctures. And so in that main blog post, we'll link to those, as well as a handful of videos as well. So you can check that out. Peppermint, I'll kind of skip over for now because most people have peppermint, but it has lots of great medicinal uses, many of which you probably know about already. Bee balm. This is one that probably a lot of you might grow because it's very pretty. I mean, it doesn't look like much right now because it's still just coming up, although I might get an early harvest of some of these because they're pretty happy. And then later in the season, they're not always quite as happy. Let's see which one I have here. Hard to tell right now. Could be the fistulosa, could be the didyma. This one here that's more of a lavender, kind of tastes like a cross between the 2 of them actually. That's more of a lavender color is the fistulosa. Basically, you want a bee balm that's got a really nice, strong, oregano-y, thymy flavor. And any of those will be good medicine. And they have similar medicine as oregano, thyme, savory, lipia. There are a lot of different plants in the mint family, especially that not only the mint family, because lipia, I think, is in the Verbeniaceae, but a lot of these carvacrol and thymol constituents that are very potently antimicrobial. Yes, I love Monarda too. Monarda is just a great genus of plants, and they're beautiful flowers. They also can get kind of weedy when they're happy. They grow by underground root runners. Sometimes they also self-seed. They're really pretty, but if you plant them, you might want to plant them in a spot where you're okay with them. It's just sort of rambling around, and they're not going to take over other garden beds that have more sensitive plants with it. One of the growers that I love, Foundwell Farm in Pembroke and Whitemare, she sells the one that I particularly like to grow, which is this one here in the picture. And she calls it a garden brute because it really does kind of take over. So you can plant it with your other robust, aggressive plants, and it can get pretty tall when it's happy. And it likes sort of dappled sun, somewhat moist soil, kind of the ecosystems that I was talking about for lemon balm and marshmallow. And it'll do well in those. Great herb to throw into teas. It's excellent dry or fresh. It's really potent, and you can use oregano, thyme, all those other ones the same way. I love it for sore throats, colds. They're a little bit warming and a little bit drying, so they're really nice when you're kind of thick and cruddy with mucus and you just feel cold and you're sluggish and run down. They're also great digestion enhancing herbs. They're great for working with different kinds of infections, including dysbiosis in the gut, like those people that didn't do so hot with the marshmallow root and the mucilage and the FODMAPs and, made them kind of gassy. Something like bee balm might actually be worth enjoying as a tincture, a vinegar extract, or a tea. Ideally, in that case, probably not sweetened because sugar tends to aggravate those states. But otherwise, if you were using it for a sore throat or a cough, you could certainly add something like honey to it. And the honey, the sweetness definitely does soften the flavor. When we ended up dealing with COVID, despite our best efforts earlier this year, and I definitely enjoyed lots of tea with bee balm. And then because I didn't want to do a lot of sugar, I was using the Korean licorice mint to sweeten it up and add some extra medicinal flavor. And because it was stressful to have COVID, I had holy basil. Did it make it go away magically overnight? Definitely not, but I did feel like it felt a little better with it until I woke up and it tasted like water because I no longer had a sense of smell and I couldn't taste any of the herbs anymore. But yeah, it's great herbs. I make really nice lung tea blends with some of these herbs, especially with bee balm as one of the key herbs. I also added, now that I think of it, marshmallow to these teas as well to sort of soften all that strong aroma and the overly dryingness of them. So you can really enjoy playing around with many of these herbs in tea with each other. A lot of people grow it because it's a perennial that's pretty. It attracts various, bees and bugs and things. The red ones, which are also medicinal, but a little bit more mild, those ones tend to attract the hummingbirds because they're a beautiful red color. So, they're just nice plants to have in the garden somewhere. Just pick and choose wisely where you plant them. Lots of amazing things about rosemary, but I think we'll skip that. A little bit of information on a couple of ways of making making honey, infused honeys. Roses, I mostly use the flowers of roses and then I buy the rose hips because it's just easier that way. But Rosa rugosa is my rose of choice. It's a little on the invasive-ish side. So be aware of that if you're thinking of planting it, but you can certainly go to places where it's growing and rambling wild and, with permission, go and harvest some flowers. It's really quite lovely. A lot of places use them in landscaping. Just make sure that they are not being sprayed with chemicals. You can use any rose that is not sprayed. It has a nice rosy aroma, and it tends to be more the wild roses or the older heirloom roses that we're using for medicine. So the seaside Rosa rugosas are popular. You can definitely use the multiflora roses that are invasive. They're not as strong, but they're still usable. Just you don't want to do anything with those multiflora roses that would encourage them to propagate because those are really, 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 really invasive and hard to get rid of. Also, there are the more ornamental but still medicinal ones like cabbage roses, damask roses, apothecary rose. Those are also worth considering as well. And a lot of those make good hips and good flowers at the same time. Really nice for just just helping relax the heart. That just when you have roses, the whole body is just like, things are better now, especially if you like the taste and smell of roses. So I particularly love it in water or seltzer. You can also sprinkle dried rose petals into tea blends. It makes an amazing glycerin extract. That's nice. I just do a basic maceration, kind of like I was talking about with the tincture, but I'll use glycerin instead of alcohol. And that really amplifies like the sweet and the aromatic, and it turns pink with those beautiful, magenta rugosa roses. And that's just like delightful as long as you like the taste of rose. So much more I could say, but I'm gonna take questions in a moment, so feel free to plug those in the chat box. I'll just kind of bounce through a few of these last slides so you see what you have access to in your extra materials. So hydrosols are extracts that we make for the aroma. They don't have a good shelf life, but they are really great to make your own sort of like a very weak water-based essential oil remedy. It does okay with roses, but actually other more aromatic herbs like holy basil work even better than that as a hydrosol. The holy basil makes a lovely hydrosol. Calendula, we use the flowers for food. We use the flowers topically in oils for skincare and rashes and irritations. And it's also internally useful for healing the gut and supporting lymphatic detoxification and for the nutrition and all that other good stuff. It's just a pretty diverse plant. Some people who are allergic to daisy family flowers may also be allergic to calendula flowers. So be aware of that. Really pretty in the garden too. You can make infused oils with it. And I do have a whole blog on different kinds of infused oils with a free short video that you can check out, and how to make salves. I've got a little bit of info here on elder, and I'm not going to get into it because we don't have time, but I kind of expected that, which is why there's a bonus star here. But I do have some elderberry syrup recipes and oxymels. There is actually, I should have linked it on here and I didn't, but if you go to the blog page and then you go to the hub for health concerns, there's a whole hub for the immune system. And I might have a video up there for free, but I definitely have more information for free on, and then we get into elderberry quite a bit. There's a whole blog in the Materia Medica section on elderberry as well, which you can find through that immune hub. Teas, one of my favorite teas to make with elder. Oh, I should have put a bonus star here, but Gotu Kola, if you're looking into playing with some Southeast Asian, Indian plants that are, you know, just really amazing for brain health and gut healing, and you can eat them. When I meet folks from places like Thailand and Sri Lanka and Vietnam, they tend to be really excited because this is a common plant people grow at their homes so they can eat it and make medicine and like a smoothie juice kind of thing as a pick-me-up. Chamomile, chamomile's not really my plant, but a lot of other people like it. It's very popular. And so there's some information here for that. Stevia is super duper sweet, pretty easy to grow if you get it from a seedling. So in New Hampshire, lots of good places. The Urban Garden Day event was last Saturday, so you missed that, sorry. But look for it next year. New Hampshire Herbal Network runs that. We've got the Herb Pharmacy in Salisbury, Mass. that has a great selection. You can just go there during their open hours. Foundwell Farm, I think, is closed for the season, but you can contact her. She might still have a few things kicking around, but next year she'll have a lot more. That's in Pembroke. It's a small operation, but really nice native plants and some extra seedlings. Warner River Farm has a huge selection, usually, especially of a lot of the culinary, many of the things that I discussed today, he has available for sale. So Jim and Ann at Warner River. And then Pickety Place sometimes has some really nice herbs for sale. Good Earth Farm usually does a few select herbs, seedlings in the springtime. And you can just ask your local nursery. Things like lemon balm and bee balm might be pretty easy to find, whereas holy basil, Korean licorice mint, sometimes you'll have to go to special like places with more of an herbal focus for that. Lots more things listed on my website. Also, if you want to get things by mail, seeds or live plants, some sources on my website. I've got lots of books. Of course, one of my books is great for that, but there are other ones that are also lovely for various books on growing plants. And then if you just want books on how to use the plants, here are some of my favorites on this slide and also on my website. And I think that's it. So we'll just call that good. So what are Schizandra berries? Oh, because that was in the tea, one of the tea blends. Schizandra berries are Chinese medicine berry. It's a vine. It's a pretty intense vine. It grows. It's not invasive like bittersweet, but the overall growth habit of it is a lot like a bittersweet vine. And they have these clusters of like reddish berries, and that's what we use. And they do lots of different things, but they're simultaneously sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent, but they're particularly kind of like sour with like a little bit of a funky extra flavor. They're a flavor explosion in your mouth, kind of like a kumquat might be. And they are adaptogenic. They're liver detoxifying, liver protecting. They are tonic for the immune system, which is one of the reasons why they're in that particular blend. And they taste much better when you combine them with other sour and sweet things like that tea blend has. They're kind of energizing as well. I was also sipping lots of that tea when I was sick earlier this year. Any other questions? Hopefully I've inspired you on some plants to try growing in the garden where, you know, it's getting a little hot to plant things, but as long as you water them well, and, you know, we have a little bit of cooler temps, but good soil, decent sun, you know, fold apart sun for most of these plants. And then just make sure they have really, the good soil is really the biggest thing. And I usually mulch them to help keep some of that moisture in. It also builds the soil over time. And make sure that they don't dry out too much because they don't usually like that. So I have timed drip irrigation. I have no financial ties to this company, but Drip Depot is where I get mine. It's a little overwhelming at first to figure out, but then it's just like Lincoln Logs, and you can leave most of it in throughout the year. So that's what I do, because otherwise I would never get around to watering my plants, and I'd probably over and underwater them. So that's what works for me. And let's see. Thank you. Oh yes, nettle is a great herb to consider in, pretty regular doses for folks who are doing postpartum care and even in pregnancy as well. Again, I mostly defer to my other experts for that. Cool. Aniseed cordial. Yes, so delicious. Awesome. Well, it's 5 minutes past and I don't see any big questions, but thank you for showing up. And I appreciate you. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your growing season.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's very, very informative.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Well, have a great night, everybody. Feel free to give me a shout if you have questions, and I have mailing lists and websites and all that you can check out. So happy gardening.